Hey, good morning, everyone. We are live today on the Fireside Chat, and we have a very special guest today, John Bruce. Yay! All right. And I'm really excited today to talk to John about his experiences with recordings and also just recordings. So, John is going to join us here, and we'll just get to hear some of his favorite stories about making recordings. And hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey, Dave.
Great to see you today.
It's awesome to be here. So
Hey,
great.
man.
To
Hey, so we got to say hi to some friends here.
everybody.
We've got first Ignacio Del Rey, who's at Roosevelt. He's a trombone friend of mine. And let's see, who else do we have? He doesn't go to Roosevelt, excuse me. He's in the administration at Roosevelt. Sorry. Let's see, we've got Mark Rauk. We have Juan June. Bob's Wansko. We have Frank Demler from Berlin. We have Kayla Torres from LA.
Oh, there's Roger Kaza. Is that Roger Kaza?
Who else do we have?
Roger Kaza.
Oh my gosh, Roger Kaza's watching?
I saw somebody named Kaza. I bet that's Roger, right?
Maybe. So, and then we also have who else? Who else is watching?
Diego from Mexico City. Diego,
hey.
My friend, teaches down in Mexico City.
Bach and baseball. I love that handle. We've got Four Flutes, One Eye. We've got Diego Caja, clarinetista. Hello, dear John.
Hey.
Esteban joined. Oh, man. I wish we could talk to Esteban about his favorite recordings because he's got like 350 recordings.
I know. Well, look at all the ones I have.
Oh, man.
Recordings, and look who's guarding him.
Hey, can I finish the rest of my quarantine in your basement, please?
You'd be able to do a lot. I mean, I've been finally getting a chance to listen to some of these recordings that I've just been looking at for the last few decades,
Oh, man.
Finally,
I can't believe you've got them all on vinyl, too.
Vinyl and CD. I got CDs. I got stacks of vinyl all the way from floor to ceiling.
I'm just so jealous, man. I'm a huge fan of like good quality recordings, and I'm a huge fan of like vinyl.
I have lots of vinyl, and it's like to Teresa's dismay, because it takes up a lot of real estate here, and she's, how come you have all those records? You can always get those online now. And I said, well, some of you can't, some of them you can't, but
John, hold the fight, man. Be strong, okay? Because seriously, that's like vinyl is like better quality sound, and I feel like when you put on a record, number one, you really appreciate it because you're like, this is like something special. This is like a event. Yes,
it's an event. It's like set up and being special. I've been looking forward to this morning for a long time, and
thank you.
I'm really pumped for this discussion, and it's like a treasure trove. It's like you and have created this opportunity to open up this treasure trove.
Oh man, where do we start?
I think I can only start with when I joined the CSO, because when I joined the CSO in July of 1977, the CSO was doing a lot of recordings at that time. It was a big part of our activities, and much more so than it has been in the recent decade or two. Yes. And it was like, we didn't used to play as many concerts back then as we do, in the 2000s, but we did a lot more recording in those days. It was like, we'd do recording sessions maybe every month or every 6 weeks.
Wow.
It would be all organized with the schedule of the conductors, So Schulte was the music director, and our part of our schedule would always be to record some of the repertoire that we were performing at the time. And then, of course, our summer music director was James Levine. And anytime, he was in town, which was for, at that time, it was 8 weeks in the summer, we would have almost like a recording session every week or every other week.
Wow.
It made for a very strenuous schedule, but it was amazing. It made for some amazing opportunities. And, you know, I always view a recording as sort of a snapshot of the of what we were doing at that particular time.
Wow.
So it's like anybody that knows me really well knows that I take so many photos, and much to my family's dismay, you know, Dad, why do you keep taking so many photos? You know, and it's because I like to look at them and kind of relive the memories. And Teresa says, oh, you just live in the moment. Okay, that's great. We can do that. But it's like all these memories bring back a colorful sort of just atmosphere, sort of inspires our current moment in a way.
Yes, yes.
The CSO recording that was made, you know, 30 or 40 years ago, and then you go and play the same piece on stage, you kind of have that in your mind. Obviously, you know, all of us that
Yes.
The Chicago Symphony, I mean, Esteban totally can relate to this. It's like, you know, he got to know the orchestra through the recordings, and these are snapshots over the years and the months and the decades of what the orchestra was doing at that particular moment.
I mean, what I'm really grateful for as a brass player is just that these snapshots were created, because the playing at that time, I mean, in the orchestra, I mean, was some of the best brass playing ever. I mean, and it's just like, for us to go back and have an archive of that, it's like, oh, we can learn so much just by listening to the phrasing, by the tone quality, like the direction, you know, just articulations, all these different like things that like now I use as like a kind of a benchmark, like a teacher.
It is
for brass playing.
And it was so great. By the way, thank you for everything that you've been doing these months, because, you know, to listen to you play for Dale Clevenger the other day was just an amazing, very, very special event. And, you know, to hear him play back to you on some of the repertoire that we played over and over and recorded just brought floods of memories back to me. Like, you know, he played that Schubert 9, and I said, Giulini, you know,
yes,
it's
yes,
because Giulini was the one that encouraged him to play it at that andante tempo in 2. And
wow.
you know, it brings me back to my, okay, I pulled out, you know, a little bit of a stack of.
All right, we gotta see these. And I'm gonna get a quick sip of coffee here Saturday morning.
Of LPs, and then a little bit of several stacks of CDs. And I noticed that, thank you very much for putting down your favorite recordings, because me thinking and said, oh yeah, you know, well, one of them that's I think should be on everybody's list.
Yeah.
Is, I mean, and it's definitely on yours, and it's definitely on mine, is this.
Aha. Yes, the Bernstein recording of Shostakovich 7.
It's the only time we ever recorded with Leonard Bernstein.
Is it the only time you performed with him as well?
Yes, it is the only time we ever performed with him.
Yeah.
And in modern days, I think he came and guest conducted the orchestra in the 1940s. Like in 1948, he might have guest conducted once. Wow. But in this was 1988, we had the good fortune of Leonard Bernstein in Chicago for a week.
Wow.
He did this, and we went on tour. We went to New York with him, and we did the Leningrad, the 7th Symphony. And I can tell you some stories about this, but I think all the stars were in alignment in that time, because, you know, Bernstein was already a legendary figure. He was an amazing teacher. Yeah. He was an amazing musician. And just to work with him, it was like, you know, and he was a great colleague. I mean, he was the camaraderie with Bernstein was just like, you know, he'd come over and hug you and, you know, slap you on the face. It was just like amazing to be in the presence of this legend that was just one of the boys, basically.
Bob Wansko says 2 weeks with Bernstein.
2 weeks with Bernstein. You're right, because we did a program of Strauss with him too, where he coached 3 young American conductors, and one did Death and Transfiguration, one did Don Juan, and one did Till Eulenspiegel. And it just like the memories are seared into my brain. And then we went on tour to New York, and we took the Shostakovich to Lincoln Center, which was one of the very few times we ever played at Lincoln Center, because we usually play at Carnegie Hall.
Yes. Wow. That's unbelievable. Do you remember who the conductors were?
Yeah, well, I mean, the only two times that we ever played in Lincoln Center were Bernstein and Barenboim. That was the time.
No, I'm sorry. The young conductors who were.
Oh, sure. The young conductors were Kate Tamarkin.
Okay.
She did Don Juan, and she was from Wisconsin. And so it was like, it was my friend, recently retired violist from our orchestra, Bob Swan, and I were just talking the other day. Bob's on. Hi, Bob. He was bringing back certain memories about various different recordings, and one of them was Bernstein. He said, Bernstein. And so I think it's on everybody's list.
Yes. Yes.
And he was saying, oh yeah, remember when he worked with those three young American conductors? I said, yeah, Kate Tamarkin was one of them, and the other one was he did Till Eulenspiegel. It was Leif Bjalland. He was
okay. So no one that we would know that had like a famous big career. Did you work with Bernstein at all at Tanglewood?
I was. That was my first experience with Bernstein. Was the year before I joined the CSO. I was at Tanglewood in 1976, and that was one of the great moments of my career. I was just 18, and at that time, we did. A West Side Story with him, West Side Symphonic Dances, and he coached all the young conductors. And I remember, he would coach all the fellowship conductors, and he did Tchaikovsky 4, and it was just so natural. It was like breathing with him. And he says, hi.
Well, she's got to come on every chat. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe she'd like to say hi to.
She knew the dog was in the room. She ran away.
Yeah, Ziggy, he'd love to play with her.
Oh my, I'm sure he would.
So, and then the third conductor that we worked with, in my opinion, showed incredible depth and talent, and he did the hardest piece, which was Death and Transfiguration.
Oh yeah.
And his name was John Fiore. At the time, he was an assistant conductor at the Chicago Lyric Opera, and his dad knew Bernstein. I think Bernstein had worked with his dad in some sort of musical capacity. So these three young conductors, Bernstein came up and sort of like in a very sort of kind way, but also in a sort of like he was a master teacher.
Yes.
Would work with these conductors and get them to do these 3 Strauss tone poems, and then we'd go on tour. Yeah, Gabby says Ziggy. My dog Ziggy. So Bernstein was a force of nature. Probably the #1 American musician of all time. I mean, he's an incredible universal musician.
Yes.
Pianist, composer, conductor.
Communicator, teacher.
Huge teacher, communicator, lectures, all that stuff. You go back over and over and listen to the young people's concerts. You listen to the Harvard Norton lectures. You get to, this is a continuing education for every human being.
Wow. And these are mostly available on YouTube, right? The Harvard lectures are as well?
Totally are. The Norton lectures from Harvard, and he'd have the Boston Symphony come and play. And so this is one of the great resources for me, because my mentor was in the Boston Symphony at the time, Harold Wright. And you hear him playing all the great, Beethoven's 6th and, Tchaikovsky's 5th and Oedipus Rex, all those, all these things that are sort of like, immortalized in these performances. So in those days, in the 1970s and 80s, our orchestra used to do quite a bit of TV also. I mean,
no kidding.
Yeah, so my very first recording, I was thinking, what was my first recording with Schulte? And actually, my very first recording with Schulte was a video. It was the Strauss tone poems on a video, and you can get those. I mean, we did Till Eulenspiegel, we did the 4 last songs. So I was bass clarinet. I was the bass clarinetist in the orchestra when I joined.
Oh man.
No, it was so cool to play Till Eulenspiegel and Death and Transfiguration, all pieces with Schulte, and to have them videotape. If you go and look at some of them, it's so funny because I look, believe it or not, I look a lot different. Then I had big hair and my face was different. It was just, it's funny to see me in those days. And
oh my gosh, just as a kid, right?
oh my gosh, you know, it was like, I just, you know, I go back and I laugh out loud.
And then, you know, probably Dale had that big mustache and the, you know, the goatee, and everyone had big hair.
It was great. And it's so wonderful because I'm looking through some of these CSO recordings, and there are photographs inside the liners. You know, the beauty of some of these big
Yes.
Here's another one of your.
Wait, there it is. Oh man, you have it on vinyl, Mahler 7 with Schulte.
You know, I remember listening to this in a van in Aspen in 1973. Somebody gave me a ride. You know, I was at the Aspen Festival in the summer of 1973, and I'm listening to this, and I said, God, what is that? It was the, you know, the horn, you know, the music. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And they said, oh yeah, that's the new Schulte Mahler 7. This came out, you know, in 1971. And so it was pretty new in the summer of 1973. And then it was done. This was one of the few recordings that were done in the Krannert Center in Urbana, Illinois. And you can sort of see the...
Yes, you can. Oh my gosh, yeah.
And, you know, the Krannert Center, in my opinion, is one of the great halls of the world.
I agree, absolutely. He said this, of course, too. Yeah, that's what Esteban says. And Jen Gunn is, of course, watching. Hey, Jen.
Yeah, this, of course, too. It's just like, and one of the things about recordings in the orchestra is that, you know, you can get a picture of the orchestra, but if the lens is a little bit dusty, or if it's a little bit out of focus, or if it's at the wrong, you don't get a really good picture of the orchestra. Wow. Those days, we recorded in two regular locations. One of them was, when I came into the orchestra, was Medina Temple.
Yes.
And Medina Temple is, you know, legendary recording location. And that's where I made my very first recording with the CSO. Was this.
Petrushka.
Petrushka, 1947, with Levon.
Oh my gosh.
And it was done in Medina Temple on July 11th of 1977. This was my second week in the Chicago Orchestra, and I was playing bass clarinet. Well, in the 1947 version, there are only 3 clarinet parts, so I was playing third and bass.
And that's a big bass clarinet part.
Yeah, and it was like I was like in hog heaven, and this was the only recording that I made with Clark Brody playing principal clarinet and me playing bass clarinet. Clark was the principal clarinetist of the CSO when I joined, and he retired in my second year in 1978. So actually, you know, maybe less than a year after I joined, Clark retired, and then came 3-person section for like 4 years or so. So we were shorthanded for 4 years, and I had to fill in and play E flat. I was doing some first principal clarinet playing. I was doing some second clarinet. I'd rotate. So this was an amazing opportunity for me because I got to record a lot of great things on different instruments and different parts.
Oh, wow.
Throughout my tenure in the orchestra. So this is my 43rd year. I'm finishing my 3rd year in the Chicago Symphony this month. And it's you know, at that time when I joined, it just happened to be, you know, Clark retired, so I was able to play all the big bass. I mean, the first recording I ever made with Abbado was...
Oh, man. I have to know, what was it like to work with Abbado? I mean, because I just, his hands, his expression, the sound he got out of the orchestra.
Yeah, Abbado was one of the greats, and he was our principal guest conductor for several years in the 1980s. So, but even before he became principal guest, we used to make recordings with him. And this was the first one I ever made. And I just remember having such a, Mahler Sixth,
Wow.
which was to have played, last month, is such a huge bass clarinet, feature. And I was so, pumped and excited to play this. And then, I remember going into and this was one of the first recordings that we made in orchestra hall.
So, Four Flutes, One Eye is asking, what are you holding up? It's this is the Mahler number 6 recording with Abbado and the CSO.
Yeah.
So, just so you know, they're backwards for us when we see them. So, we see the cover art and we see like, okay, this is a great one, but
I'll let you know what it is. Mahler Sixth was my first recording with Abbado, and now I listen to it and I'm thinking, they weren't able to capture the real essence and the detail of the Chicago Symphony because they were still fiddling around in orchestra hall. Most of our really good sounding recordings at the time were made in Medina Temple.
Wow.
And in the Krannert Center. I mean, this Mahler 7 in the Krannert Center is, I took it out this morning and listened to it again, and I could not take it off. I was just like, oh my God, this is like not only a great orchestra, but every little detail and every little nuance and every little distance and every little texture and every little density is captured on this recording. And unfortunately, a couple of years later when we recorded Mahler 7 2 more times. I recorded Mahler 7 twice with the orchestra. I wasn't on the Schulte, but in 1980 we recorded Mahler 7 with Levon, and
no kidding.
We did that in Medina Temple, and here it is now. That I have great memories of Mahler 7 Levon, and this was done during a very hot summer at Ravinia. We'd go into Medina Temple where it would smell like elephant dung because what they did with Medina Temple in those days are they used to have circuses there.
No kidding. Really? They had circuses.
I know.
How did it get the name Medina Temple? Was it actually a temple, like a place of worship?
The building was owned by the Shriners. It was an organization. It was an organization of they would wear these
the hats. They have those parades, the little cars, right?
I mean, it would be like a public service organization, and they would own this incredible piece of real estate, which is a historical monument now. And so they would rent the place out to circuses and high school graduations and the occasional performance. And they would rent it to the Chicago Symphony to make recordings in. And so I have photos of the inside of Medina Temple because
no kidding.
The temple was such a legendary recording location because the sound that they were able to get in there really did represent the Chicago Symphony at a very high level, just like in Krannert Center.
Yes.
Orchestra Hall at that time, for some reason, did not, and they went through all sorts of contortions to make Orchestra Hall. I'll get to that in a moment, but here is a picture of my chamber music group, Chicago Pro Musica.
Oh wow.
Made recordings in Medina Temple.
Oh man.
1983. So this was one of the sessions of our recording of, I think it was the
Is that Jay playing trombone?
Yes, it is. It's
no kidding.
Jay Friedman.
Oh wow.
It's George Vosberg on on trumpet. We recorded the Soldier's Tale. And then later on, we recorded a couple of. This might have been the.
Unbelievable, man! Thank you for sharing that. I don't think we'd ever get to see this. This is stuff that, like, honestly, if you weren't sharing these stories and you weren't sharing like these pictures with us, we'd never see them.
Well, okay, here's a picture of the Krannert Center in
Yes.
'86 when my chamber group Chicago Pro Musica recorded
Oh.
on stage of the Krannert Center. We recorded some modern chamber music, and it was an ideal recording venue. So even
Wow.
when you're all set up and sounding
Wow.
good, you want the microphones and you want
Okay.
the engineer to be able to capture everything really, really well. So we were happy to be able to record in Krannert, but the orchestra made several recordings in Krannert, and they all sound amazing. The one that I like to listen to a lot is the Beethoven 9 with Schulte.
No kidding.
And this was done back in the early 1970s. And of course, the whole piano concerto of Beethoven series was done there with Ashkenazi, and two of the Beethoven symphonies, the sixth and the seventh, were recorded in Krannert. And I think that's it. It's Mahler 7, Beethoven 9, Beethoven 6, Beethoven 7, and the 5 piano concertos of Beethoven. And that done in this amazing acoustic of the Krannert Center in Urbana, Illinois. And then the orchestra found that it got expensive because we had to go down there. The orchestra, they had to bring everybody down there, put us up in hotels, stay there for several days, rent the hall, set everything up. It got to be hugely expensive. So then they figured, well, we don't have to pay for hotels if we can record in a location that's almost as good. And so that was why we recorded in Medina Temple, because it was home. We just had to,
exactly. They don't have to put people in hotels. They don't have to ship all the recording gear down. I mean, that makes sense. But I have to say, as a listener and as a Chicago Symphony fan, like those recordings that were recorded in Krannert are absolutely the top of the top for me.
They are, because of the way that everything was able to be captured. And there's something about acoustics that, helps the sound or doesn't. And that location really, really helps develop the sound, and the way they were able to position microphones. And it really helped to be able to show the Chicago Symphony in its
I have to back up really quick and just say, like, you've played in all the concert halls in the world, like all the great concert halls. Like, you've played in the Proms, you've played in the Philharmonic, you've played in the Musikverein, you've played in Suntory Hall, and you say that Krannert Center measures up in little old Urbana, Illinois, measures up with all the top halls in the world
easily.
Yeah. I
mean, like, blows some of them out of the water.
Yeah, honestly, like, so I didn't know why we were touring down to Urbana. I was, I didn't know the Krannert Center, and it's about 3 hours out of the way. And, I'm new in the orchestra, and I was just like, man, we're doing a run out concert to Urbana. And everyone's like, oh no. Yeah. Like, and I was like, why is no one like not like grumbling about this? And then I get there and we played in the acoustics, and the sound that we were able to get, I was just like, I think this is the best concert hall. I mean, it's one of the better concert halls I've ever played in. I like it personally, just for me, I like it better than the Philharmonic in Berlin, because for the horn, there's nothing behind the horn, right? So when you play for a horn player, part of our sound is bounced off that back wall and then it's projected. So we don't have a directional instrument like a trombone or a trumpet, but whatever's behind us creates, and the distance from us from that wall, what material it is, creates the sound that you hear in the mix in the room. And so Krannert has these beautiful, like, solid wood panels.
Beautiful wood in Krannert. And I remember they closed Krannert for a year back in, the early 2000s, for a whole year to renovate it. And they stained, or they re-oiled every inch of the wood.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry, we lost you, John. You stained. They stained.
My mom's. That's all right. She can call me back later.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the Krannert, Esteban says, was it designed by the same architect as the Berliner Philharmonic? I don't think so. I do not think that the.
I had heard that, but I think it's perhaps the same architect that I Googled that, and I believe it's the same architect that designed Avery Fisher Hall in New York.
Well, he got Krannert right.
Yes, he sure did. Yeah.
It's always a treat to play in that great hall. It's called the Foellinger Great Hall, and it is a great hall. And I think, you know, if you ever get a chance to play chamber music there, that is really nice. We did a program there once. Dan will remember this. We did the Schubert Octet there, and it was just like heaven. You know, it was like, oh wow, you can just kind of float on this acoustic, and it helps you. And you're encouraged there to play very, very delicately and very, very lightly, because every little detail will be transmitted to the listener, just as it is in the Mahler 7 of Schulte. And that piece, you know, is so colorful because it has so many, you know, percussion effects and so many like shimmering string effects and so many powerful different coloristic in the brass, that it's all captured on that recording. And I have to say that in the Medina Temple, they did that too in several recordings. So my first recording was Petrushka. It was in Medina Temple, and then Mahler 7 was done several years later in Medina. And then I remember recording with Schulte in Medina Temple, the Mahler 2nd.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah, so that was one of the few of the sort of the later recordings that Schulte did in Medina. And then he also did Bruckner 5. Bruckner 5 with Schulte in Medina Temple. And these recordings, especially the Bruckner, stand out to me as really capturing the energy of the Chicago Symphony. Yes. Both very, very close and very, very far, because the acoustics of the Medina Temple were able to take that, you know. And so my friends, I sort of like, I'm going to go on a tangent here, but in the early 1980s, I had the good fortune of meeting the folks from San Francisco that have a company called Reference Recordings. Huh. They made the best audiophile recordings ever made. And so we used to have this thing called the Chicago Consumer Electronics Show every year in Chicago. And I just kind of like went over to their booth and I said, hey, you know, would you be interested in recording some chamber music from Chicago Pro Musica? And he said, wow, you know, we haven't really done much on location recording outside of California, but isn't Medina Temple in Chicago? And I said, yeah. He said, if we can record in Medina Temple, we've got a deal for you. And so in the summer of 1983, Reference Recording brought all their stuff from California, and we recorded a couple of albums, including the Soldier's Tale. Wow. By Stravinsky. And
which is the picture that we saw earlier.
Right. And then and Dan Gingrich will remember this too. We did Till Eulenspiegel einmal anders, you know, for five players, Till Eulenspiegel, all that done in the legendary and storied acoustics of Medina Temple.
Wow.
And we won the Grammy Award in 1985 for Best New Classical Artist. And I really have to think that, you know, Reference Recordings, with their expert engineer and their expert, you know, ability to pick out a recording venue and capture all the details of it, were really as responsible for that as the plant.
Yes.
You know, it really makes a difference, you know, because, yeah, so
John, let me go back real quick. So, speaking of audiophile recordings, some of the ones that are absolutely legendary of the Chicago Symphony are the Fritz Reiner recordings.
Yep.
And they're recorded in Symphony Center, then Orchestra Hall. And what was legendary about it is, well, number one, the acoustic hadn't been changed yet. There was a change with a Symphony Center that I understand took place in 66, 7?
66.
66. They added maybe air conditioning. And I think they took out some of the plaster, or they removed some of the plaster in the ceiling. So there was no longer this reflective surface for the sound. But pre-66, these recordings were made, and there was, I guess, one mic in the hall. Is that correct? Is that, you know, like say like the Heldenleben and the, you know, the Reiner?
So the original recordings made in the orchestra hall that were high fidelity were done in the 1950s. This was before Reiner. This was Kubelik. So Kubelik made a series of recordings, and the most legendary probably of those is Pictures in Exhibition.
Yes.
So the first of 6 times that Bud played that opening was for one microphone hanging out in the middle of the hall, done on Mercury Classics, who at that time was located in Chicago. It was a Chicago recording company, Mercury Classics, and they had one microphone. Then in the 1960s, or in the late 50s, when RCA came in and started recording the orchestra with Reiner, they started using multi-microphones and stereo. So the one microphone was mono, you know, in the early recordings, it was just one microphone, one point, and it wasn't even stereo. They didn't have stereo in those days. It was just like one. And then when you had stereo, it was like, oh, wow, you know, it's like you can get better feel for the sound stage, you know,
Yes.
where each musician is seated in you know, even in the mono recording, you can hear, because of the distance from the microphone, where the musicians are seated. But stereo brought, you know, a new dimension to recordings. And when RCA came in and recorded the CSO with Reiner, they did it obviously on analog tape. And so these analog tapes have been preserved over the years, and engineers have come in and like cleaned them up and made sure some of the scratches and things like that were taken out and remastered them. So there's a mastering process where they play the tape and then it gets cut into the grooves so that they can stamp the vinyl. Wow. And stuff. There's always opportunity to lose information at any one of those steps. So one of them is just the transfer between tape and the stamper. The stamper is like metal that then they use to stamp the vinyl. And so there's always the opportunity to get to lose information there, which brings me to another. I mean, 1983 was a great year for me, because I got to make several recordings with my chamber groups, Chicago Pro Musica and the Chicago Symphony Winds. We went on, this was a wind octet made of members of the CSO that was formed by Ray Still, our principal oboist. And so Dan Gingrich and I are the only 2 remaining members that are still in the CSO in the Chicago Symphony Winds. And most of them are all died by now, you know. Both horn, you know, the other, both bassoonists, the other horn player. It's only me, Larry Combs, and Dan are still around. But we used to go on like runouts on Sundays and Mondays on tour. We used to take our wind octet and go play concerts because.
Did you do music that was specifically for that ensemble, or did you have any transcriptions made?
We had a transcription, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm going to see all this information is flooding back to me. But we went to Los Angeles, California, and played a concert there. And on the next day, we went and made a recording on the MGM Sound Studios for a company called Sheffield Lab. And Sheffield Lab in those days was making direct-to-disc recordings. Wow. So they would cut right into the disc and be played. And then obviously there's no chance for editing. It's like one performance and it's right on the disc, and then that's it. So we recorded the Mozart E-flat Serenade for wind octet, and then we recorded a transcription by our bassoon player, the principal bassoon player at the time, Willard Elliott, had made a wonderful transcription of 4 of the Grieg lyric pieces. So originally for piano, and he made a transcription for wind octet. And I remember I had to play a really, really high part on the E-flat clarinet. And so it was like, okay, how do we figure this out? Because we can't stop the tape because there's no tape. We had to like switch the pieces and then
switch the order so you could
put in order. So we record these 4 lyric pieces first, and the last one had E flat clarinet, and so I had them have my reed ready, and then put it down, and then like literally like 5 seconds later, start on a different clarinet the Mozart Serenade, and then we recorded the first movement of the Mozart Serenade on that same side with the Grieg pieces, and then we were able to take a break, and I was like, you know.
Oh my gosh.
Turn over the lathe. All these things were installed permanently at the MGM Sound Studio, where that again is a legendary recording location because, you know, they made Singing in the Rain there. We got to see the floor where Fred Astaire would do his tap dancing.
Oh,
And you know, it was just like all these good vibes were in this room. And we were making a recording direct to disc, which means you eliminate the one step of going to, you know,
tape to conversion.
Bring it. But that's audio file recording there. And nowadays, you know, I remember when we used to record in Medina or in Orchestra Hall, these recording companies like London Decca and RCA and Deutsche Grammophon would come in with truckloads of equipment. They'd have a tape recorder that was, you know, as tall as I am and as, you know, wide. I couldn't put my hand around it. And they'd have this tape that was like 4 inches thick, and they'd put this tape and they'd record multi-track. It was like they'd have like 32 different tracks on this one huge piece of tape. And when we'd have to wait for them to change the tape to put a new reel on. Nowadays, you can have all that equipment on something that's like the size of a bread box or the size of an iPad, you know?
Yeah.
All that stuff is so electronically done, and you know that things have changed so much since the early days. But back to acoustics. When we'd make recordings in Medina Temple, it was great. They had it all figured out. The acoustics helped it out. Then London Decca, or actually Deutsche Grammophon first, had the
Deutsche Grammophon was with Levon, correct?
Well, first Levine was with RCA.
Okay.
And so this is an excellent point, because in those days,
conductors
had their own contracts with recording companies.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't the orchestra, it was the conductor. So if we were lucky enough to get a conductor that had a recording contract, we'd get recording, you know, work. And so we were lucky to have Levine with RCA at first. And then during the time when he was in Ravinia, he started up with Deutsche Grammophon. But the other two conductors that we work with regularly were Claudio Abbado. He was with Deutsche Grammophon for the longest time, and the very young upstart guest conductor. Let me see if I can find.
Can I take a guess? Can we take a guess? Can we?
Please.
All right, everyone, write in your guesses if you can on who this possible conductor could be. A young upstart conductor in the early '80s. I have my guesses. Oh my gosh, Barenboim.
Barenboim in Medina Temple.
No, kid, look how young he is. Look at those sideburns.
Yeah, this is a legendary recording.
What is this recording? Is this
Bruckner 4?
Oh, 4 flutes, 1 eye, says Barenboim, and
Yep.
then Dauengard says Danny.
Yep. And look, okay, take a look at this. This is a picture of the orchestra recording in Medina Temple.
Oh wow. Wow. Okay, where are the horns at? I mean, are the horns cut off the picture?
See here.
Okay. You know, Dale was talking about having something behind the horn section when they recorded. Like
Right.
he said, you know, I want something like a wooden baffle behind, about 6 feet behind the horn's bell. And he's like, and then I want mics in front of the horns. And that was really interesting for me. Really quick, we need to say hi to Emma Gerstein. Emma's watching.
I loved your chat yesterday. That was awesome. It was so great to hear about, you know, what you did in New Zealand and in New World and in Indiana and in Manhattan.
I mean, she's had quite a career. It's awesome to hear. I mean, You have two, man. I mean, look at all those. Hey, how are you, Teresa? Great to see you.
My name. I am not opposed to these records. I love them. You know, I as a recording engineer.
Yeah.
But I'm mad at him never listens to them.
No,
so
I have time now.
Is like, why do we have all these? But thank you for the opportunity. I'm so happy that they're being used and to hear the house and you know.
Hey Teresa, you know, if you ever want them to be used, you know, just invite a few of us over, you know, like we can have some snacks, some coffee, and, you know, maybe put a record on. This could be like, you know, record time with John.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome. We would love that.
Great to see you. How are the etudes coming, by the way?
Huh?
How are the etudes coming?
The etudes, yep. I've got etudes coming along here and there, but I've taken a couple of weeks off because I'm listening to all these CSO recordings.
That's awesome, man.
It's unbelievable. I mean, you know, just to it brings back so many memories. Like Medina Temple, I have to say, is now a furniture store. The Shriners sold Medina Temple, and since it is a historical monument building, they could not do anything with the outside of it. But Bloomingdale's bought it and gutted the inside, so that was a very sad moment for every fan of recordings.
So, what about what year was that? Within the
that was like in 2000, like just around 2000, that Medina Temple was sold, and
it's like the end of an era almost.
Because in 1997, Orchestra Hall was renovated for the third time. So, in like you said, 1966, it had a huge renovation, and then in 1997 is when they built Symphony Center.
Okay.
But in the meantime, it was like in 1986 or something, they had another renovation of the Orchestra Hall, but they installed a new organ, and it wasn't as disruptive as the 1966 renovation or the 1997 renovation. But for that season, 97, 98, we performed concerts in Medina Temple. Wow. And people, you know, could come in and smell elephant dung and hear the Chicago Symphony. But I remember going into the control room at during breaks of these recordings with Schulte, with Levon, and you know, just seeing all these pictures of these Shriners wearing their fezzes, and you know, it was really an image in many different ways that you remember all your life. Okay, so Barenboim, he recorded many legendary recordings. I think the first one was the Sanson Organ Symphony, and then the second one was this Bruckner 4 in Medina Temple. My first year in the orchestra, Deutsche Grammophon decided they would like to come back to Orchestra Hall and start recording in Orchestra Hall. So we did this recording with Barenboim. It's the Moldau, it's the Hungarian Dances, it's Les Préludes, it's Slavonic Dances.
Okay.
And these were done in Orchestra Hall in my first year in the orchestra. So it was 1978. It was early in 1978.
Wow.
And I remember I was playing second clarinet. Larry was already principal clarinet. And we would have music set on the stage that we hadn't performed yet. It was like, you know, we'd practice, you know, at home. We'd practice the Moldau and Les Préludes. And they also had the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. So we're recording all these pieces. We record them twice, put them in the can, and Barenboim was so clear in those days. There was absolutely no, you know, question about where he wanted things. And so we could record things with him without having performed them. It was interesting.
That was going to be my next question, is how did you prepare for the recording session? Most of it, did you have like a rehearsal and then you're like, all right, there it is, let's record it?
That's it, on the same day. Okay, let's record, and that's it. And then, you know, a few corrections, and that's it. In the middle of the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody, Barenboim suddenly stops and it's going, let's take a 20-minute break. I said, okay. So we're all going downstairs. And nobody's listening to any takes at that time. So we go and, have our sandwich or our coffee. And then we come back on stage, and on the stage, on the stands, are Brahms' Hungarian Dances.
Wow.
We hadn't performed them. They hadn't been announced. It was just like, let's just record these and see how they go.
Oh, man.
And we never got through the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody #2, but the Brahms Hungarian Dances are on this recording. And we literally sight read them.
Hey, I mean, that's being a professional. I mean, that's like what you have to be ready for anything. You have to say, all right, like, I know these and I'm confident in my sight reading skills. That's why you practice sight reading. Like, for when that happens, like you show up and you're like, this wasn't in the thing, but okay. Like, it could be for an encore. It could be a change of program, a change of conductor. It could be at a recording session and they want to hear, another piece that you hadn't practiced.
That's right.
So that's a real life story, kids, on how sight reading has paid off.
Incredible. And so it was sort of hit or miss in terms of acoustics. This one happened to have pretty good acoustics, but unfortunately, Abbado didn't have a very good, I don't know why, but it was the same company, and sometimes the same engineer would come in with Abbado as with even Bernstein, and they just would have different ears on that day or something. So we recorded, so I've made in my time 3 different recordings of Symphonie Fantastique of Berlioz with the CSO, and the first one I made was with Abbado, and with this. And it was like, I was so excited because, I was newly on E-flat clarinet, and I was playing second clarinet until the last movement where I switched to E-flat. And I was so excited that this was being recorded by Abbado, who was, amazing. Then when the recording came out, I was listening to him, and then I'm thinking, oh, gosh, this doesn't sound the way I felt when we were playing it. It sounds like it's underwater.
No kidding.
Like, oh gosh, what did the recording engineers do? In those days, they used to go through all sorts of contortions to make Orchestra Hall sound like the, Musikverein, or to make it sound like the Krannert Center.
Yeah.
They would like put plastic and plywood sheets all over the seats in the gallery and the first balcony of Orchestra Hall. They just cover these seats with material, which they thought would create more resonance.
Wow.
Like,
so when there was a recording session, you could not have a concert because there was all that stuff in the hall.
Except for our stage crew was so expert that it took them maybe 2 hours to take the stuff down. We would have a recording session until maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then come back for an 8 o'clock concert.
No way. And there was all that stuff covering the whole, like, all the seats.
Take it down, and then they put it back up for the next morning.
Unbelievable.
We have an amazing stage.
Yes, we do. Yeah. I mean, Chris is like, unbelievable. Yeah, all those guys, they just take such good care of us. And they're so much fun too, right? They like, so
much fun. But then to move all the equipment to Krannert, or to move all the equipment to Vienna or St. Petersburg. We made a recording in St. Petersburg. We did Bruckner 8 in the great Philharmonic Hall in St. Petersburg on our first Russian tour in 1990.
What?
To tell you, if Dale is listening, he will not forget this, because we're all like jet lagged, and we're all dragged ourselves out of bed, and we're ready to record Bruckner 8 with Schulte. And everybody's going, where's Dale? And it's like, oh gosh, where's Dale? Dale had overslept and missed the beginning of the recording session. So they had to get him out of the hotel and drag him down to the recording venue, which wasn't close to the recording session.
Oh my gosh, no kidding. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that happens, right? And so what did they do when they were waiting for Dale? Did someone else play?
Yeah, other people, we did other spots from the piece. They did tests, because they never recorded the Chicago Symphony in St. Petersburg's Philharmonic Hall.
Okay.
And that was, one of our on location recordings. And another one was in Cologne. We've made several recordings in the Philharmonic in Cologne, which
That's
has
a really nice hall.
pretty good acoustics,
Yeah.
and several recordings with Boulez. One of my favorite recordings.
John, let me ask a question real quick. Is that Bruckner 8? Is that the one that's available in the Schulte box set?
Yes.
Okay, the Schulte Bruckner box set. I mean, I have that up on my shelf
Check
somewhere. It's behind me, but
Yep. We recorded 2 complete cycles of Bruckner.
yes,
One with Schulte and one with Barenboim.
Yeah. And I mean, do you prefer one particular version of like Bruckner 4 over the other? Do you prefer one particular version of Bruckner 8 over the other? Or are they both great for different reasons?
I'll tell you the answer to that. And I have to be honest, I haven't yet had time to re-listen to both of those cycles.
Okay.
I remember being involved in specific pieces from those cycles of Bruckner. The one that really pops out to me is Bruckner 5 with Schulte,
Yes.
because that was one of the final ones that were done in Medina Temple.
Oh.
And that was with London Decca, and they got the sound just right on that one. So I pulled that one out just now and listened to Bruckner 5, and I remember when it first came out.
Wow.
I thought, gosh, this is right up there with one of the best sounding recordings that I've had, and the orchestra, in its full glory, and then we made a video of Bruckner 5 with the oldest conductor that ever conducted the Chicago Symphony, Takashi Asahina, and that was in 1995, I think, and this whole video crew from Japan came in to Orchestra Hall, and we recorded a Bruckner 5, and that for me is a great opportunity, because at that time Barenboim was just music director, and he had encouraged some of us to play German clarinets. So I don't know, I mean, you might relate to this, because when you went to Germany, you had to play German horns.
Yes.
And so Barenboim was very keen on the German, style of woodwind playing.
I mean, it's a different sound. I mean, it's a very different sound.
It's a totally different animal.
Yeah.
It's like playing a zebra instead of a horse, because it's like there are different reeds, different mouthpieces, different design, different fingerings. So we were encouraged by Barenboim. You guys got to learn German clarinet. You got to learn German clarinet. And so 3 of us sort of embraced that. And
Did you try?
I not only tried it, I got a set and learned it. And on that Bruckner 5, you'll hear me playing principal clarinet on the German style clarinets. And I think that's the Asahina video, and you can get that on YouTube.
Wow, and you're playing principal?
Yeah. Oh, bye, Jen. Bye, Jen.
Yes, Jen's watching. Jen just said she had to leave, but
I loved your chat the other day.
Oh man, that was really fun too. John? We have about 2 minutes left, but can we keep going? Do you have time, or are you?
I can go for another like half an hour.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm like just totally into like hearing you talk about the recordings, and I hate to cut you off because you have so many stories and so much to say, and like so many things to tell us.
We could go on for months, literally, and we could sit here and listen to all these recordings after that.
That's so crazy. So you were playing that Bruckner 5 with Mr. Asahina in was it in Orchestra Hall?
That was
on the German clarinet.
German clarinet.
No kidding. And did you learn anything from that experience on the German clarinet?
Yes, because certain repertoire really suits that instrument.
Huh.
And I said, oh, that I might be able to play Brahms on the German clarinet. So when Haitink first came in and did a whole Brahms program, I said, you know what, I think I can do it. So we did Brahms second, and I pulled out my German clarinet and played Brahms second. And then we did some Schumann symphonies, and they work great in Schumann symphonies.
Wow.
I wouldn't want to play them in Daphnis and Chloe or,
yeah,
Shostakovich, symphonies or some. It's just like, it's a different aesthetic. It's a different breathing aesthetic. It's a different sound. It's much more, like sustained and Yeah, I would say just a different kind of phrasing and a different sound, because it's a different equipment, you know, different kind of.
Isn't that cool though? You have different options with different equipment. I mean, it's like you just have all of these, ideas and possibilities kind of come to light.
Yeah.
Shall we continue? And I'll see you in a second. And someone asks, what are the differences between Muti and Abato? So we'll talk about that. Hey, we're back, and we are going live with John Brussier, and we're talking about his favorite recordings, and we are also getting to know the history of the Chicago Symphony through the recording stories. So John has a lot of stories for us, and he's been really generous, and it's just so nice to spend a Saturday morning together with John, and I'm just really happy to talk to him. Hey, welcome back, John.
Thanks.
I was just saying how much I really enjoy your time with us and your stories and your generosity. It's just, these stories are fantastic. I mean, it brings the orchestra to life.
Yeah, well, both you and I got the request from our fine archivist, Frank Villela, to choose our 5 favorite CSO recordings. And this request came a couple of weeks ago. And I still, it's a monumental task to choose just 5 out of the thousands of recordings that the CSO has done. And so I'm just filtering through the ones that I remember and as being amazing. And I'm finding some incredible surprises too. Like
what were some of the surprises? And before you say that, we have to say hi to Karen Bazarak. She's watching.
Hey, Karen.
I love Karen. Karen is the only cellist I've ever played for as like a horn lesson. I remember I went to Karen and I said, Karen, I know you're from Chicago. You got to teach me that Chicago style. And all she could say is man, your rhythm you need to work on your rhythm. And I remember I was like, all right, I guess that's, the Chicago style is just playing with good rhythm, but it was so enlightening for me to play for someone that wasn't a horn player, and she's got such great ears. And it's so nice that we were both in Fort Worth together, and we're now both in Chicago, and we're actually neighbors.
Nice. That's right. Hey, Karen. Hey. Well, so some of these surprises are sort of off the beaten track recordings that you wouldn't necessarily identify. And one of them, a few of them have been, let's see. This was one of them, the Elgar Violin Concerto with Gil Shaham, and it's on his own record label. And it's
no kidding.
Yeah, and it's released commercially, but I put it on and I couldn't take it off. I couldn't stop listening because it was so beautifully, interwoven and beautifully, and the sound was captured well.
Who was conducting?
In Orchestra Hall. This is David Zinman conducting.
Wow.
This is, I think, Zinman's only recording with the Chicago Symphony.
Huh.
And we took it on tour. We took this piece on tour to Florida, and
John, is that you in the picture?
Yeah, that's me.
That's you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's Dave.
Dave Griffin.
Yeah.
No kidding. And Bill Buckman.
Yeah.
And then Eugene Isatoff.
Yep.
Oh man, look at that. Fantastic.
So this picture was taken in the concert hall in Miami. It was the first concert that was done in that hall, or one of the first concerts done in the hall in Miami where we just played in January.
Wow. Which is the Arched Center, correct?
Arched Center. That's
yeah.
right. I don't know if it's named that. I think, yeah. So that was a surprise to pull out. And then another recording, I mean, the Rite of Spring with Barenboim.
Wow. Yeah. I
mean, the CSOs recorded the Rite of Spring several times, with Ozawa and with Schulte. And
I have to say those album covers are from that era are just spectacular. There's another one I think of the Chicago River,
right,
from that same kind of vintage. And those I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just have to say those are some of my favorite album covers.
Right, the album covers are great, bring back memories too.
But you said Rite of Spring with Barenboim?
Rite of Spring with Barenboim, which we did also on a video in Cologne.
Yeah,
and that's he did a lot of things really well, and you know, I immediately pops into mind Wagner and Mozart. He did Wagner and Mozart so great.
Wow.
But this Stravinsky is totally amazing.
No,
And
his Mozart piano recordings, I mean, the piano concertos are some of my favorite recordings. Did you get to play any of those with Maestro Bernstein?
oh yeah, and Beethoven. We did the Beethoven piano concertos. In fact, I remember doing the Emperor Concerto on the day that Mathieu Dufour auditioned for the CSO. And Barenboim was playing solo and conducting. And that night, he invited Mathieu to sit in on the, so this was part of his audition. It was like, Mathieu, he's won the audition, but let's have him play in the orchestra. So I had to lend Mathieu my extra coat, and then he sat there and we played the Emperor Concerto without a conductor except for Barenboim conducting at the piano. That's something that I'll never forget.
And I bet, I mean, Mathieu is just one of the special musicians I've gotten a chance to work with. He's a good friend of mine.
So this is not an off the beaten track recording, but Otello is one of the high points of Chicago Symphony history. We did this in 2012 at Orchestra Hall 3 times, and then we took it to Carnegie Hall in New York.
Wow.
And it wasn't Maestro Muti's first recording with us, because his first recording with us was the Verdi Requiem.
It wasn't the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet?
Well, that's another one of my favorites. You know,
Mine.
That's a great one too. I mean,
but these are so the Romeo and Juliet and the Requiem predate the Otello possibly or not?
Well, Romeo and Juliet was done, I think, the next year. Let me just see here. It says here 2013. So that was done the year after Otello. The Otello was done in 2011. So a couple of years. And so this was during the period of time when I was acting principal. So it was when Muti first came in. I was acting principal, so I got to record a lot of these things before Steve became principal. And one of them was Romeo and Juliet, and one of them was Otello. And I remember doing Otello in Carnegie Hall, and that being like so much more colorful because of the acoustics. And I said, gosh, I wish they could have recorded the Carnegie Hall performances of these, because they were in a special way even more kaleidoscopic in their drama, you know.
Yeah.
But this is a really, really good you know, document of the way we did Otello in those days.
Wow.
You know?
And I think everyone might know, but Riccardo Muti is a scholar of Verdi.
Oh,
it's kind of like his life's mission to really do Verdi in the best possible, most elegant musical way.
Nobody does Verdi better than Muti. He's the Verdi proponent. And you know, you and I, we did you play Aida?
Yes, I did. Absolutely. It was.
They recorded that. That was one of the great, amazing opportunities.
That was really unbelievable. I mean, it was so much fun, and you know, I'll never forget that that story he told about the tenor. Do you remember? I forget. Was it Renee? I forget which singer it was, but it was a famous singer from the day, and he was saying that Verdi wrote this this high note in the first act, and Verdi writes it with a decrescendo going up to the high note. And so the singer studied, and he really worked on like going up to this high note and like, you know, doing a decrescendo, which is really hard. You need like that kind of momentum to go up to the high note. And then he finally gets it after months of study, and he does it in concert, and he got booed, right? Like the audience, the gallery booed him. And so he goes out at like the, you know, intermission or maybe after the concert, he's got his score. He's like, look here, Mr. Verdi, you know, he wrote a decrescendo up to that high note. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, like the audience, like, you know, they pull their glasses down, they pretend to look at the score, and then they go, well, Verdi was wrong.
This is in La Scala, where they're brutally honest there.
I know, but just like the fact that like they boo, the singer would go out and argue with the people who booed them, and then the fact that the singer would be like, no, the composer was wrong. It's like just It's like,
So the other recording that I really loved that was kind of a surprise to me was the Firebird that we did with Boulez. And I remember that being fun to do. I remember that being great when we were doing it, but then to listen to it, it's like, gosh, I wonder if I could play that way now. It was like, it was so like, gosh, that's the way I really want to sound. Because I was on D clarinet, I was on the piccolo clarinet in this recording, and it was like Boulez really brought something special out of the orchestra. We made a lot of recordings with Boulez.
Wow. I mean, so what do you think he was able to capture in that recording, and what about the playing? I mean, so we have to know that Stravinsky was a Russian composer, and that he studied in France, and he wrote this music while he was in France for the Ballet Russe. So having a French conductor, especially someone who's like a composer, really fits that piece. I mean, it's like that's the right person to conduct. But how was he able to get a special sound from the orchestra, and how was he able to get a special sound from the texture of this Stravinsky piece?
Clarity. He always, not only his requests to the orchestra, but just his motions brought out clarity in the orchestra. And then he would take the most complex piece. I remember recording Pelléas and Mélisande of Schoenberg with him. And that's a very, very thick piece. It's an early Schoenberg work. And him taking apart different, very, very thick parts and bringing out the important parts and like cutting down the unimportant parts, and that would immediately become like a crystalline clarity. So that was one of Boulez's, we recorded Mahler 9 with him.
I mean, isn't that one of the kind of hallmarks of genius, though, is where you're able to take something complicated and make it simple. And you're able to, explain what you understand to someone who might not know anything about what it is. It's just like Neil deGrasse Tyson, when he explains physics, it's like, oh, I don't understand physics very well at all. But when he explains it, I'm like, oh, this makes sense.
Yep. And Boulez was able to do that so well with us and so many other groups. So that's why we were so lucky to have him in the transition between Barenboim and Muti. And we were also lucky to have Bernard Haitink, who made several amazing recordings with us too. The one that I just pulled out today was Shostakovich 4, another very complex piece that we took on tour with Haitink. And he just, he was a master. And several Mahler symphonies, Mahler 1, Mahler 2, Mahler 3, Mahler 6. All those we recorded on our own house label, on CSO Resound has many treasures on it. And so
honestly, I wish that I was able to hear all those recordings that maybe aren't available anymore. But I mean, I just for a student of music and a student of, I just feel like every time I listen to you play, every time I listen to the recordings from the predecessors, I learn something. And what's kind of sad for me is that there are the pieces that you can find in the standard Chicago Symphony catalog, but then there's ones that you're just like, man, I wish I could hear them play this, or man, I wish I would have gotten to them do that. That's as a student of music, I really feel sad that I can't hear some of those.
I learn every day from hearing. Now I've been listening to these recordings, and I'm learning by just listening to what my colleagues did, 40 and 50 years ago.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, gosh, this is the way it's done, And one of the recordings that I pulled out that's kind of a sleeper is this.
What is that?
It's Elliott Carter's Partita, and it's Luciano Berio, and it is Toru Takemitsu. And these three composers wrote music for the centenary of the Chicago Symphony. They were all commissioned to write pieces for the centenary of the Chicago Symphony, and these three of these pieces are represented on this album. And it's like, it would go by if you didn't really look for it.
Wow.
was on Teldec, and I happened to pull it out from, you know, a stack that I had, and I'm listening to it and I'm saying, gosh, you know, there were some amazing sounds there that I
And Elliott Carter's not easy. It's really modern. It's kind of atonal. Not really, but I mean, it's like it can
oh
be.
no, it's really totally is atonal. And he was you know, luckily Barenboim was a big Carter you know, proponent. He and I got to know Carter really well, and we did Boulez and I did, and the CSO did the American premiere of Carter's Clarinet Concerto in 1998, and that's got to remain one of the highlights of my career.
Oh man, that's so cool. So is it time to wrap up, John?
Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, my family is.
Hey, we really appreciate spending time with you this morning. I mean, it's always fun hearing you talk about music. You're so passionate, and it's just like your memory is just crystal clear from those recording sessions.
To tell you, you know, one other story of oh, I don't know if Jay's listening, but when we were recording Mahler 2, sometimes we finish recording a movement and then the engineer or the producer comes out and says, we need to do this one spot again. And sometimes people have gone home, and it's like Schulte says, okay, we're going to do back this one place again. And then everybody's sitting there, but Jay Friedman is not there. And I just
No.
Schulte's saying, there the hell is Mr. Friedman. Everybody Mahler too, and everybody's like, oh gosh, you know, I think Jay went home. And then another Barenboim recording.
Wait, go back. No, were they able to like get Mr. Friedman back, or were they like, did he drive back, or did they get another trombonist? Like, what happened?
They had to get him back. They had to just like, he might have been in the, you know, down the street at the coffee shop. I don't know, but he eventually came back, and we did that patch.
Okay, yeah, because I wouldn't, you know, Schulte's one person I wouldn't want to make angry, you know, those eyes and that, you know, that head.
Screaming skull.
Yeah, exactly.
Smiled sometimes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to make him angry.
I noticed somebody asked, what's the difference between Abbado and Muti?
Yes.
Well, probably the only similarity between them is that they're Italian.
Right? And they're very lyrical conductors. They're very like operatic when they conduct.
Right. Abbado at the time when he was conducting us was very soft spoken. You know, it was like he was like almost mumbling when he'd be in rehearsals, and he'd if something wasn't together, he'd kind of look at his score and he'd go, not together. And then we'd do it again, and then he'd stop and work on little things like that. And then in the concert, everything would just come alive. It would be like and would happen in the concert, because all he had to do was like show certain things, and he was very demonstrative. He usually had a pretty long baton and very clear, you know. And so it was interesting because Abbado was so meticulous in rehearsals, but so, you know, you had to really listen hard. And Muti, you know, I think Muti is more, wears his heart on his sleeve a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you know, he brings great moments of energy and joy and fire, you know. In a way, he reminds me of Schulte more than Abbado. Because Schulte would have this incredible fire and incredible energy that would come out, you know, even in rehearsals or recordings.
Wow. Yeah, and he's just so intense too, right? Muti has that intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's such a gift to be able to listen to all these recordings again. And oh, I forgot to mention Giulini. My only recording with Giulini was done in my first year of the orchestra, which was his last year as a guest conductor of our orchestra. We did the Schubert Fourth Symphony with Giulini, and I remember I was playing second clarinet. Clark Brody, this was his last year in the orchestra, my first year in the orchestra. This fourth symphony of Schubert, it's paired with the unfinished symphony. And in those days, we used to have double woodwinds and everything. You know, we used to have, even if there were only 2 clarinet parts, we'd have 4 clarinets sitting there for Schubert symphonies, Beethoven symphonies, Brahms symphonies, Bruckner symphonies, everything we double woodwinds.
No kidding.
I got to sit in on a lot of recordings that I wasn't necessarily playing solos on. So, but this fourth symphony was the only recording I ever did with Giulini. And, you know, everybody just loved Giulini because he was such a lovable guy, you know, and he was so soft-spoken and almost self-deprecating at times. You really wanted to do it because you loved him and you wanted to bring it out the best way for him. So it's like I've had so many amazing opportunities, and you're giving me an opportunity to revisit all of these.
Oh man, John, thank you so much for your experience. You're just so generous with your time and your knowledge and your stories. I don't know if people realize how rare it is to have someone at your level sit down for an hour and a half and just talk about their favorite recordings. It's like you're like a superstar of the clarinet world, and you're just sitting here and you're just like, you know, sharing with us these things that really mean so much to you. And it's and your memory is just, as I said before, is just crystal clear. It's so fun. You take us right there when you talk about these. And I do feel like, man, we could just go, oh, this could be like a series. We could talk about recordings like, you know, once a month with you, and you'd never run out of stories. So, you know,
I'll look forward to it. The podcast, man, the podcast.
Yeah, we're gonna start it, man. Absolutely, the Fireside Chats will be moving on to podcasts. I bought all that equipment, so I'm really looking forward to transferring this. And man, thank you again. Everyone says hi and thank you. I know we have a couple thank yous up here. Dawengard said thank you. 4 Flutes, 1 Eye says so inspiring and informative. Gabby Vargas gives a lot of hearts. Let's see, Esteban says, bravo, John, thanks for sharing this great information. Giovanni Diaprile says, thank you. And it says, you guys are the best. Dawengard, and then 4 Flutes, 1 Eye says, a great person. Thanks, John.
This is so exciting, Dave. Have a great day, and let's talk soon.
Hey, big hugs, man. Stay safe and stay well, and we'll talk soon. All right, bye-bye.